Yeah.
Who are you talking to? Oh, I don't want to. rid of that. Oh.
We have had such positive affirmation for it that we kept that part of our Mdiv hybrid campus program. I bring that up because that was a way that we made theological education accessible online. Well, if it's online, anybody in the world can tap into that. So we started having more conversations over the decade with various different Mennonite churches around the globe asking us, hey, can you deliver it here or here or here? So let me just give you an example. In the spring of 2019, our then president, Sarah Wenger-Shank, as she was getting ready to retire from AMBS, she took 2 international trips. One was to Ethiopia, which is where she spent much of her childhood, and her parents were missionaries there. By that point, when she traveled, AMBS and the Mennonite Church in Ethiopia had been in conversations for about 1.5 years. And as you probably know, the Mennonite Church in Ethiopia, Mesorete Christos, is the largest Mennonite church in Mennonite World Conference. They're pushing 500,000 people. In 1980, they would have said they would have had about 5,000, roughly. Then the communist government overtook the government. Church and most Christian churches went underground. When they emerged, 50,000 people, they would have said, was in their denomination. And now we're talking almost 500,000 are getting there. So they're growing by leaps and bounds. They know that for them to be an Anabaptist Mennonite denomination, the importance of their pastors having an Anabaptist theological grounding and foundation. Because if it doesn't happen, they know it's going to be gone. There's lots of other voices clamoring for their attention. So they had previously worked with Eastern Mennonite Seminary on some education back in the early 2000s, but that was really before the day and age of online education. And that program took way too long, and it didn't quite live out to what they had hoped to. So they talked with us because we do, again, have more of an online program presence, had conversations, and in the end, we developed a brand new, fully online degree. It's a Master of Arts in Theology and Global Anabaptism. Now, we did a draft of that. They looked at the draft of the curriculum, and we'd had this conversation back and forth, and they would say, no, we need more peace education embedded within what we're looking for. So we'd do another round, and then we tweaked it a bit more for their purposes. So in the end, we have this degree, MATCA degree, that can be done anywhere in the world by anybody. With Ethiopia, we tweaked it just a bit. And I'll share a little bit more about what that tweaking is and what it looks like now. So that was one trip that Sarah took, was to kind of finalize this arrangement after about 1.5 years of conversation. The other place that she went to, and was her last international trip in this role as president, was to South Korea. One of our board members is Hyun Her. Hyun and his wife, Sue Park Her, have been Mennonite pastors in California for quite a long time. Sue is actually one of our denominational ministers, but they have a ministry called Reconciliation. And they have a lot of contacts and ministry contacts in South and North Korea. And so they have this ministry presence over there and connections throughout the country. So Hyun has long been wanting AMBS to get over there. So, and I'll share a bit more about what that program is a bit later. All to say is Sarah went over to start the relationship building, just to start to simply get acquainted kind of thing. So that was in the spring of 2019. In the spring of 2020, so 1 year later, we have a new president, President David Buschert. He was approached by Cesar Garcia, who was executive secretary of Mennonite World Conference, about might AMBS and Mennonite World Conference form some kind of collaborative arrangement with each other. And so in the spring, that was approved by our board, by Mennonite World Conference. It's a collaborative arrangement. We are only the second organization to have that kind of arrangement with Mennonite World Conference, MCC, Mennonite Central Committee, being the other one. This puts us more at a seat at the table to hear what all was going on. It also gives us an opportunity for World Conference to be kind of an important vetting organization for us. So for the Mennonite World Conference, why did they come to AMBS and ask us this? Well, as you likely know, Anabaptist communities in the global South are multiplying in an unprecedented way. And so a number of years ago, there was a study done within Mennonite World Conference of the 5 major regions, and then books were published out of that. And Goshen College here had a role in that too, with their Institute of Global Anabaptist Studies. Global leaders have identified that strengthening the Anabaptist identity of their leaders and congregations is their most urgent need in all 5 of the areas. And so for Mennonite World Conference, AMBS then was invited to collaborate and connect with the gifts of all parts of the church to strengthen the Anabaptist witness to God's reconciling mission around the world. Again, why AMBS? Why not other Anabaptist seminaries? Well, we again are owned by Mennonite Church USA, Mennonite Church Canada, 2 members of Mennonite World Conference. And so World Conference sees AMBS as a gift of 2 of its member denominations to its 70 plus other denominations of Mennonite World Conference. So that's kind of the linkage and into why AMBS. We're also positioned for it, and there's a lot of other reasons too. But this undergirds and is an umbrella to everything I'm about to say, and then we can figure out how many countries we are really connecting with. The other part that I want to say here that is also crucial, and some of you would know, Joe Sawatsky. So Joe is a full-time employee of Mennonite Mission Network. So in August of 2020, Mennonite Mission Network and AMBS formed a collaborative arrangement around Joe's time. Many of the places that were approaching us with conversation, Mennonite Mission Network staff and folks already had relationships. So what Mennonite Mission Network did in this case is they said, okay, we're going to give 1/4 of Joe's time to AMBS to help these international conversations happen. Because we're also a bit strapped. There's only so much that we can do at AMBS of the staff that we have. So I wanted to let you know that this is another important way that 2 Mennonite institutions of Mennonite Church USA, and we're also half Canada, are working together on helping to serve the global need of Anabaptist identity is really what it is. We have other collaborators along the way too, but I wanted to give just a brief timeline as to what I'm about to share now. So back to Ethiopia. I had mentioned Sarah went over there a couple of years ago to kind of finalize the arrangement. And here's what the plan was. The plan was basically that AMBS would take a cohort of about 10 students each year who would stay studying in Ethiopia, but they would be our students. We work in partnership directly with the MK denomination, the Masoretic Christos denomination, and the college that they have, undergraduate college that they have. So now if you are in Ethiopia, they are presenting to their people that there is MK College and MK Seminary. And it really is AMBS. But their dream ultimately is to have their own standalone Mennonite graduate theological seminary. They don't have enough PhD trained people at this point to do that. So the arrangement that we have is temporary. We are helping them live into their dream at some point. So we're going to be graduating more people. And in fact, within the last couple of years, a couple of our graduates from the Elkhart campus are now enrolled in PhD study programs. And we have a number of students over there who will be getting master's degrees programs at a much higher rate, which we'll see what they do, whether they are done with their education or whether they enroll in other PhD programs. That's kind of up to them. So the plan was a cohort of about 10 students each year, give or take. And it would take about 2 years to go through this MATCA degree that we have. And so the plan was they would take fully online classes in the fall and the spring, along with whoever else is taking online. And then we would send 3 professors over to Ethiopia each summer to each teach like a 2-week intensive class. That gives good face-to-face interactions. It gives our faculty more opportunity to hear how the Spirit is moving within Ethiopia, learn more about them, their church. That helps us evolve as a global Anabaptist learning center. And just back and forth. That's where COVID came in, and we have not gone there yet. We've done the program, so we currently have 3 cohorts running, and we have 26 students that are currently in those programs, but we haven't gone there yet. We have our fingers crossed that this summer we'll get to go there. But as you also know, if you follow Ethiopia, there's some other political and governmental stuff that are raising up. So we had planned to send a professor over in December, but that's when the US State Department said, folks, stay away. The country might be on the verge of a civil war. So we decided not to send James Crable, who was an adjunct professor for us, over in December. And so he again did it online instead of in person. But our fingers are crossed that this summer we can maybe finally get there. So that is Ethiopia. We have a student at AMBS who's now a graduate. His name is Henok Makonnen. Henok is a graduate of the college in Ethiopia, came to AMBS in one of our programs, and we hired him as a teaching associate in this program. And he, in the end now, we realize he has served an invaluable link for us because he has helped us understand better culturally where these students are coming from. Henok also knew the computer infrastructure system there very well. And so he knew our system, so he could help train their students, or our students, but the Ethiopians in our, very technical computer stuff. And then he could do training videos in Amharic instead of in English, even though all students have to pass an English proficiency to be students at AMBS, at least currently that's how it is. But still, it's not necessarily first language. So when it gets into certain technical language, it's just easier to talk in one's own language. So Henok, a couple years later, has proved to be invaluable. Henok continues in a role. He graduated last spring. His wife is still a student at AMBS. He continues in a role at AMBS, and there's some other dreams about what the Mennonite Church in Ethiopia wants him to do here in the United States, actually, on behalf of the Ethiopian Mennonite Church. And he's awaiting a certain kind of visa stuff right now. But Henok has an office at AMBS, and this is a map that's right outside his office. And so he has a map of Ethiopia, and he has all these little push pins representing the 3 different cohorts and where they live. So I know it's very tiny, but trust me, there's 3 different colors. There's a red, green, and blue. So the red represents cohort number 1 from the 2019 start. And there you can see they're kind of scattered at different places there in the country. There's a red dot way up here, and there's red here and down and here. Then there's a bunch of green dots, which is the second cohort. So there's a bunch of green dots here and a bunch of green dots here. This area here is Addis Ababa. And then there's a whole bunch of blue dots here in this area. So that's just to represent where these students are. So every time I walk by it, it's a nice way of praying, but also just a visual reminder of where our students are. So Henok wrote this to us, or for us, or said these words: "The current political and socioeconomic challenges are demanding that the Ethiopian church leaders respond in fresh ways. It's a miracle how the leaders of Mesrete Christos Seminary and AMBS have come together and paved the way for church leaders to access a quality Anabaptist theological master's level education." So that is Ethiopia. That is one example of theological education that we're doing. Another example would be on another end of the continuum. It's with our Journey program. The Journey program started 20 years ago, and it was a partnership with Central District Mennonite Conference and Indiana, Michigan Mennonite Conference and AMBS. And there were 3 people who dreamed this thing up. I was representing CDC at the time, and Tim Lichty was representing Indiana, Michigan at the time. And then Joel Gingrich Longenecker was representing AMBS. So we came together because there was needs in our conferences, needs of theological education for bivocational pastors who had no formal theological training whatsoever. Or there were also people in our churches who were lay leaders that wanted more theological and biblical studies. So we dreamed up this program and modeled after other efforts that basically is a 3-year program. It's a certificate-based program. It's undergraduate level, but it's not for credit. You get assigned a mentor and you work through this curriculum together over the course of 3 years. And then twice a year, you come together at retreats, either at Amigos Center or Camp Friedenswald or AMBS for more input and discussion. So that's how that program was dreamed up 20 years ago. So it's evolved over time. So in time, Pacific Southwest Mennonite Conference sent pastors into this program, pastors of immigrant congregations in particular. Ohio Mennonite Conference is now sending folks. And others can also come into the program without having a sponsoring conference. So this past January, several folks from Uganda now are participating in the program. And so we tweak the program depending on where people are at. We don't expect the Ugandans to come to the retreats twice a year here in Northern Indiana, Southern Michigan. And we also tweaked it for California as well. So we have Zoom options now, very much so. That's how the program works. Several years ago, one of our graduates, who is Hmong, his first name is Jonah. Jonah is originally from Southeast Asia, lives in Minneapolis now, or Minnesota. Jonah approached David Miller, one of our teaching assistants in our church leadership center, about can we do Journey with this group of pastors that he has contact with in Southeast Asia. Jonah is Christian Missionary Alliance, and so his contacts are going to be more that background. So what they ended up doing was, this is pre-pandemic, so Jonah and Dave went to Thailand to meet with a group of handful of pastors from Vietnam who were Hmong. And they met in Thailand because you couldn't do this in Vietnam. Dave and Jonah lived with these pastors for about 3.5 weeks, eating together, everything together. And Dave went through level 1 of the 3 levels of the curriculum with them. And Jonah translated everything. So they spent that time together. They went their separate ways, came back home. The plan then was for Dave and Jonah to return in 6 months to meet with this group and go through part 2 of the curriculum. Well, they get over there, and for a variety of reasons, these pastors from Vietnam could not get to Thailand. So Jonah said, well, I know this other group in Laos. So they brought a group over from Laos to Thailand and went through level 1 all over again. And then they came back, and then the plan was to go back in 6 months and to bring both cohorts together and go through level 2. That's when the pandemic hit. So we have continued to work with them, but Dave Miller gets up at 12 midnight to 3 a.m., 4 a.m. doing Zoom sessions with these pastors walking through this curriculum. So that's another level of AMBS education that we are delivering. It's not graduate level, but it's at the level that meets the need of where it is. The third example that I want to say is a very recent example. In Indonesia, it was a lectureship series, is all that it was. It was a 3-day, 2 hours a day lectureship series between the 3 Anabaptist synods or Mennonite groups that were there. So they came together. It was all on Zoom. And each day there were 2 different scholars that presented. There was an AMBS scholar and there was an Indonesian scholar. And they presented on these topics of Anabaptist history, biblical discernment, and Christian-Muslim relations. And so did that 3 days. I was not on it, but those that were on it told me, they said at the end, this was one of the first times these 3 groups came together in this way. But in the end, there was such excitement and energy, and it was like, well, what's next? We don't know. But there was something there, right? So that's another example of how, again, we are working under the umbrella of Mennonite World Conference, working at making theological education accessible in ways that partner with whoever the local is. And then again, the MATCA degree, Master of Arts in Theology and Global Anabaptism, that can be done by anyone in the world or anywhere, and you can apply directly. We also now have exploratory conversations in Ghana with the Good News Theological Seminary, and many of you would know of that program. I know that Willard and Alice Roth would have actually been some of the founders of what now is this program way back in the early 70s. They were telling me the story of when they gathered under a particular tree for Bible studies, and then a couple decades later, here's part of the result of that. So This seminary in Ghana is different than in Ethiopia. They are wanting a very similar program to what we're doing in Ethiopia, but in Ghana for a graduate level program. The seminaries are different. The Ethiopian seminary is a Mennonite seminary, Mennonite college. And good news, if you know, in Ghana, it's not Mennonite, it's African independent, African initiated churches. And that's how the Mennonite accompaniment was there. It wasn't to start Mennonite denominations. It was to support the more indigenous Christian groups that were there. And so Good News really does that. And Good News also has multiple countries. So it's kind of countries from West Africa coming together to go through there. So it's multinational, Ethiopia not. But they want a very, very similar program. One of our key learnings in Ethiopia was having Henoch. That was not our plan when we went in, but we hired him. And later we learned how invaluable that was, particularly for that program. So now when we have conversations with any other country wanting to do something similar, our question is, who is our Henoch going to be? And so we told Ghana that very thing. Ghana, if we are going to do this, please send somebody to our Elkhart campus to serve in that way. They have identified somebody, but they have not been able to get their visas yet. That's another challenge, as you would likely know. Getting visas this day and age is hard, pre-pandemic, and also now definitely pandemic and post-pandemic. It's hard. So they have somebody identified, ready to come, waiting the visa before we can get this program going. Korea is another example. So Sarah went over to Korea. Those conversations, the pandemic really impacted how those conversations unfolded. And then we had a presidential transition. So it took a bit to resume those conversations, but those conversations are up and running. And in fact, I learned at the beginning of this week that David Bushert is heading to Korea here in about 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, to really work out more conversations. He's going over along with James Crable, again, one of our adjunct professors, and Joe Sawatsky. So the three of them are going to go over a bunch of lectureships and a variety of things. The Korean scene, or the scene in Korea, an AMBS interest, there's three different kinds of people over there, and some are overlapping and some are not. As we know at our church, we have Mennonites in Korea, people from our congregation or people who spent time in our congregation and went back home. So AMBS, we have had students from South Korea. So we have alums over there. There are people who claim Mennonite over there. And in fact, it's one of the newest members of Mennonite World Conference. And then there's this other group of pastors that are around this Nehemiah Institute. It's primarily a group of pastors who already have MDivs, who left the Presbyterian Church, which is the predominant church in South Korea. It's kind of more of the, quote, state church. It's more of a mega church model. Those pastors are saying that that expression of faith does not connect with the younger generations. It's just big and whatever else. So that group of people come together to this unaccredited thing called Nehemiah Institute, where they're training and teaching each other. This group of people have come across Anabaptists. And in fact, they have turned towards Anabaptism and are really digging in. What does it mean to follow Jesus 24/7, as opposed to whatever they thought their expression was earlier? So in fact, one of our alums who I was in seminary with 20 plus years ago translated like 100 some books of Mennonite theology and history books into Korean, and that's some of what this group is going, but very bright people. So they ideally would like for the Nehemiah Institute to become an official accredited extension site of AMBS. I don't know that we'll get there. I don't know what will happen, but that's kind of where they're going. So Dave and folks are going over there to continue those conversations. And in fact, they've been having a lot of Zoom conversations over the last year and a half, 2 years, but to see what might be possible. And if out of this trip, if things seem possible, probably our next step is to do one class in June as a trial run. And it would likely be James Crable teaching that class as a trial run. And then we see what makes sense after that. In Ethiopia, the issues there for us to do this education, it's not English, because a lot of people speak English, or at least enough to be able to have students, but finances and computer infrastructure are the challenges we're having to work through in Ethiopia. South Korea It's not computer internet infrastructure. It's not finances, but it's language. And a bit of other cultural dynamics too in teaching and teaching pedagogy. We in the West really like to have good pedagogy of discussion with students. What we're learning is that in Korea, that's not what they want. They want to sit at the feet of the master. Maybe of what some of you might remember from 50 years ago or 40 years ago, where you lecture for 45 minutes straight and people absorb. So we're having to work through and figure some things out, but translation is one of the very key parts here. So we're heading over there to further explore. The Seba curriculum that some of you would know from the Hispanic Mennonite Church here in the United States. They have two different curriculums. There's Seba, which is college level, and it trains up hundreds of Hispanic folks here in the United States. And it's administered right now by Mennonite Education Agency. And the director of that program wants to retire here in a couple of years. And so he's looking to see where can this place be lodged. And so we're having conversations with them. But one of the conversations that are ongoing is that the Seba curriculum, you can get college level credit, but there are people who already have college degrees in this program. And so we are looking to put some of their curriculum into a graduate level program and then offer our certificate in theological studies, graduate level, as a way for people in Seba to do that. And it would all be in Spanish because that's what the curriculum is in Spanish. We have several professors who can fully teach in Spanish, no problem. So that would be another way. And if that happens, that can also go outside the boundaries of the United States and Canada too, at least with Spanish, and some other possibilities that we have when we're having conversations in Central and South America. So at the very last point there, conversations with Anabaptist leaders in Central and South America is one of those things too, where there's a variety of different Mennonite seminaries and schools in different parts of Central and South America. And the last thing we want to do is come in and do anything that's not helpful. Again, we only go where we're invited. And again, we always check in with Mennonite World Conference. And Central and South America in particular was one of those places where it was very, very helpful to get the perspective from Mennonite World Conference. Because just because somebody approaches us doesn't mean that those are the right people we should be talking to. Because if we end up talking to them, we might be offending somebody else that's in the country. And so Mennonite World Conference plays a very invaluable role in all of this. So the other last thing we want to do is to export some colonialistic kind of education. So we're very mindful of working with whoever is local. So that's part of the conversations with leaders in Central and South America. The second and the last point I mentioned of sharing of pastoral studies, distance education curriculum. So the Journey curriculum, for example, we are open to just simply giving it to other countries and then they can adapt as they want. And so in Indonesia, we've done that or in process of doing that. They wanted the curriculum. We may or may not administer it, but we said, here you go. You can have it if you want. And then you adapt it for your purposes and what you need. We do have some very encouraging signals out of this. Let me just focus here on Ethiopia for a little bit. There continues to be a growing interest within the MK Seminary network. So with each cohort comes more students. So this third cohort, we had the most students of the previous two cohorts. So it's picking up steam over there. Students are speaking highly of the program. The course evaluations of these students are right on par with the students that study here in the United States. That has improved over the last 7 years, and the Ethiopian students are also measuring great satisfaction, which is good. We always have to have continued conversation. I mentioned about Hanok Makonan's role with AMBS and MK Seminary, how crucial that was. That continues to be so. And other feedback we get from students from the Global South is very encouraging. We continue to seek out and get helpful feedback, what's working well for their experience, whether they're in the country they're in or whether they're here in Elkhart. What can we do to improve? What can we do to strengthen? So we're continually doing that. We continue to evolve in becoming more competent interculturally. At least those are our strivings. We work at that as a faculty, as a staff, as a seminary in all that we do. And this definitely helps us in that. We also did a bit of a study, and our peer institutions across the United States are not doing what we're doing. in most parts. So what is happening, everything I just shared is really unique to AMBS compared to other seminaries. There are other seminaries by sure who have international students and who are doing some things, but the collective of everything that I just shared is really unique among seminaries, among Christian seminaries here in the United States. Some other international things, and then I'll wind down, and then I will be glad to hear your questions. Mennonite World Conference, Indonesia gathering this summer. So as you know, there's a cap of about 700 people that are allowed in person there. And so you have to kind of get accepted to be in that. And so David learned the other week that he'll be invited to be there in attendance. We have Explore program, which is a program for high school youth that happens every summer. That particular group this summer got accepted to go to Indonesia. So that group will be heading over there. And also David Miller, a teaching associate, and Esther Muhagachi from Tanzania, who's one of our students. They will be leading a seminar under the auspices of Mennonite women on supportive marriage relationships. This is a seminar they've done in a variety of different settings. And so that has been accepted to be done there in Indonesia. And lastly here, you might want to know, well, how does AMBS fund all this stuff? Because this does stretch us. We are currently funded and staffed at the level of what we do. All these things are a lot more, which you ask any faculty or staff person is like, well, what do you expect us to do? Just pile more on. So kind of we think in the long term of sustainability. And so I just want to briefly mention that we are on the front side of a comprehensive campaign that looks at how do we do this operationally and fund it operationally for the next decade or so. And so that's what this is. This portion of the campaign is a $2.5 million campaign that would give us more dollars for more capacity to increase staff and travel costs and things like that as we continue to have these conversations. And then lastly, I'll just take words from Joe, where he talks about the Global Leadership Collaborative, which is what we call it within this campaign, enables leaders to attain recognized credentials or degrees, satisfying a hunger for professional development. This initiative signals to the church that we belong to each other, that AMBS sees the church beyond North America and expects to grow together in the knowledge of the fullness.
Okay. Just wondered where you were. I tried to call you.
I'm right here. I am very happy to take questions that you might have or curiosities. So feel free to raise your hand and ask away. Bill. Yeah.
One of your list of institutions that you engaged with was the Ghani Institution, which you clearly defined was an African initiative.
Yes.
Context. It wasn't.
That's who they serve.
No,
yeah.
Right. Within that context. Knowing that Mennonite Mission Network with Joe Sawatsky, our organization has had strong relations to another kind of broadly similar in Benin, the Bible Institute.
Right.
And yet it's not aligned with as an Anabaptist institution. But do you have any sense that, in a sense, you could be doing all kinds of good things for all kinds of good people?
Yeah.
Are there limits to that?
Yes.
I personally in our kind of PBI, and they're ready for some transition of leadership. And I was just aware whether that's been on the radar too, but once again, that's, well, how much good can we do for everybody?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So basically, if people didn't hear, Bill asked the question, we have other schools, seminaries in the United States that many of us support. Why aren't they on the list that I showed, or how does one get on the list? And can we do it all? And I said, no, we can't. So what I would say is that these conversations, or what I have up here, have been at the initiation of the host church or the school. So it might be in this case with Benin, maybe it's not on here because they've never reached out to us. That doesn't mean it couldn't be into the future. Yeah, so that's in part where that's at. And yes, Mission Network certainly has had good relations there. And so if it were to ever pop up, then of course Mission Network will be very helpful. But we cannot do it all. So when we do have countries, that's in part why the partners or the agreement with Mennonite World Conference is extremely helpful, because they can say, yes, Ethiopia is definitely ready for this kind of thing, but over in this country, maybe not. Or in one country's case, they were asking for the MATCA degree, but World Conference and even some other leaders in that country said, no, I think what they're really asking for is journey, not. So we have to get a sense of what's appropriate to the context. So nothing against Benin Bible Institute. They might pop up someday. Who knows?
I'll keep my mouth shut.
No.
But that's a helpful context.
Yeah.
To recognize what you have to work with.
Yeah. Sure.
Thank you so much for delivering so much good news. Good news is hard to find these days. And your enthusiasm and for everything is really great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll just note my enthusiasm got away with me and I talked a lot longer than I expected to. Yes.
I'm a new Mennonite. What is the Mennonite World Conference?
So College Mennonite Church is a member of Indiana Michigan Conference, which is a regional body. And our regional body is part of Mennonite Church USA, which is a national denominational body. And that national denominational body is a member of Mennonite World Conference of Mennonites all over the globe. And there's about 75, 77 national Mennonite denominations that are all part of Mennonite World Conference. So it's kind of a big global network of Mennonite denominations. Yep, good question. Bill.
I gather that the great majority of the financing of these programs is from the United States. To what extent are these financed in the countries where they're located? And what's behind my question is it sustainable?
Yeah, good.
If the finances are largely coming from the United States?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And each country is different on that question of finances. So the question, the good question was financially, finances and sustainability. How are these programs financed? And is it primarily from the United States? And if so, what's the sustainability plan for these programs? So I would say it depends on the country, depends on the context. We are still very much on the front side, so we are not fully up and running yet. So the reason that I put that campaign on at AMBS at the end, that's a step in trying to eventually continue to figure these things out. Now, having said that, let me back up and just use Korea and Ethiopia as two examples. And Journey is not all that expensive. There's travel costs, there's staff time, but it's not a graduate level curriculum that we're administering or that we're doing. So Journey as a program is much cheaper than, say, MATCA degree. In Ethiopia, as we started that, we met with a generous donor couple a couple of years ago, and they donated $100,000 to get things off and running. They were captured by the vision, and we had a budget plan in mind for 2 years of financing. And so that's where that came from. But also in Ethiopia, we know that they in Ethiopia would not be able to pay our tuition levels going forward. They do pay some tuition, but the tuition that they pay goes to the college that's there. And that's their part of administration. There's other reasons it's hard to get money out of Ethiopia. So the sustainability plan for Ethiopia is what we have into our campaign as we think into the future more about that. So the 26 students there are certainly not paying the level to tuition to AMBS as, say, 26 students in the United States. But again, Mennonite World Conference and other entities, this is what needs to get figured out. South Korea is a bit different. Finances won't be as much of an issue there compared to Ethiopia in terms of the sustainability, because they would be able to pay more of the same tuition level. But great question, and that's some of what we will continue to work at figuring out, along with Mennonite World Conference. Yeah. Vic.
You mentioned administrative leadership of Sarah Wenger and also David Moshart. But I must say I'm terribly impressed with the faculty involvement.
Yes.
Getting up in the middle of the night to lecture, traveling, intercultural challenges, linguistic challenges. My stereotype of faculty is that they don't like change very much. They want things to continue. How in the world did the faculty get on board?
We threatened them. No, just kidding. No. Yeah, that works well, as you know, as president. No. So the question that Vic brought up was, faculty are on board, so impressed with the presidential leadership of carrying things out, but it takes faculty to really carry these things out and to be on board with it. And so how in the world did we get our faculty on board? And I said, we threatened them, which was a joke, not at all. No, so obviously all along the way, faculty have had to be involved and have had to give their thumbs up. If they didn't, we would not be where we are. We are also, I would just say, at this state of time of AMBS faculty, we are blessed with a group of faculty who really want to get out into the church. And you've had several here within this Sunday school. We have a faculty that's on the younger side, and they're just thriving for these kinds of opportunities, but still have to maintain balance, which we continue to wrestle with at AMBS and be in conversation with. Last month, Dave gave a state of the affairs on global stuff with our faculty because there were certain questions coming up, because as a development person, there's a lot I know about, but not everybody on campus knows about certain things because it's not part of their regular parts of life and work. So last month was critical for Dave to get up and talk through a lot of things and to, again, get people at least to know where we're heading or what's expected of them down the road and where our partnerships are. So, but ultimately, yes, our faculty are on board. If they were not, we would not be able to do this. And part of our hope with our campaign is to increase our staff FTE at some levels to help carry out parts of this vision as well. So, good question.
How does Eastern Mennonite Seminary feel about this?
You'll have to ask them. So the question was, how does Eastern Mennonite Seminary feel about this? On the one hand, you have to ask them. The other thing that I'll quickly say, and I know our time is up here, I get this question a lot from people, like, why doesn't AMBS and EMS just merge together or different things? What I'll quickly say is AMBS and EMS are kind of, in my mind, like an apple and an orange. We are not in the same seminaries. We have different constituencies. We have different governances. We are a standalone seminary owned by two Mennonite denominations. Eastern Mennonite Seminary is embedded within Eastern Mennonite University, and they are not owned by the denominations. So Mennonite World Conference looks at AMBS a little differently than EMS. The other big difference right now that gets us in these conversations is what I had in the timeline way back early on, is that 10 years ago, we started doing more online distance-friendly programs. EMS primarily has focused on campus-based programs. So they are not able to deliver education around the globe in the same way that we are, or in the United States for that matter. So our Mdiv Connect program, and Mdiv Campus program, if you look at all those Mdiv students, over half are in the Mdiv Connect program. And they are living in Los Angeles and New York City and everywhere in between, and in British Columbia and in Ontario and everywhere in between. They are our students. They would not be our students probably otherwise, because they would not have picked up and moved to Elkhart. A number of them have families. Some of them are already pastors in congregations or working for other faith-based service agencies. And some are exploring. So we have 10 years ago worked at making theological education more accessible in how we deliver our education. And I would say that's one of the big differences between AMBS and EMS at our points in our history. We're in position to explore these conversations, and for EMS to explore it, it would be different. That also doesn't mean that we might not have opportunity for partnerships along the way and using some of their faculty for some of these programs too. That's on the table.
So you're not really competing for the same students.
Yeah, no, there might be the occasional student or two, but really we are focused on different constituency. But not completely, but yeah. I'll be happy to stick around here more and have more conversation with people.
Bob, we are much in your debt for helping us to learn what's happening just 10 miles down the road and around the world. And I might say, as I sometimes in moderation watch the television news and see so much bloodshed and conflict and ill will, the idea that Anabaptist peace teaching is embedded in theology in all these countries cheers me up. And I thank you for your part in this, and I thank the seminary. I think it might be appropriate to have a word of prayer. Gracious God, we thank you for all who labor as teachers, for all those who are caught up in the biblical vision of every tribe and every people and every nation and every language. We thank you for Bob and all those who are working hard at AMBS. In Jesus' name, amen.